Oh no, we're going deeper. We're trying to understand what made the pharaohs more than just kings, why we're still so, I don't know, captivated by them thousands of years later.
Yeah.
And to help us crack the case, we've got some really fascinating articles, each with its own take on what it really meant to rule as a pharaoh.
And it really was a unique kind of rule, wasn't it? It wasn't just about like military power or political maneuvering. To really get the
Yeah.
pharaohs, you got to get ancient Egyptian belief, their whole worldview. The two were inseparable.
Right, it's like their power came from a totally different place than we're used to thinking about. Speaking of which, one of these articles mentioned something that just jumped out at me, got me thinking. It's about the word pharaoh itself. You'd think it'd mean like god king or conqueror, something super intimidating. But get this, it actually translates to great house.
Huh? Great house.
Yeah, it's not what I expected at all.
It is unexpected, isn't it? But that actually tells us a lot about how the pharaoh's position evolved, how it became about so much more than just, sitting on a throne. See, early on, they were just kings. But as their influence grew, became more about religion and, like, their place in the cosmos, the title shifted to pharaoh.
So it became like less about the individual and more about what they represented.
Exactly. It's about this connection to the whole kingdom, almost like they embodied Egypt itself, the Nile, the land, the people, everything.
Wow, so it wasn't just about ruling, it was about like being this embodiment of their entire civilization.
You got it.
That's a heavy responsibility. And that makes me think about another term that came up in the articles, this idea of the pharaoh being lord of two lands. Does that tie into this whole embodiment thing?
It absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Narmer comes in. He's generally considered to be the first pharaoh.
Yeah.
And what he did that was so significant was unifying Upper and Lower Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just conquering land. It was creating a single kingdom.
So it was about bringing things together, unifying them.
Yes. And this wasn't just some political strategy. It was about maintaining Ma'at, this fundamental Egyptian principle of balance, of order.
Okay, so we're not just talking about ruling a physical kingdom here, but like a cosmic balance as well.
Exactly.
Tell me more about Ma'at. What did it actually mean for the pharaoh to be responsible for this balance?
Okay, so imagine Ma'at as this, like, cosmic force that keeps everything in harmony.
Yeah.
The cycle of the Nile, the relationship between the gods and humanity, everything. The pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was the guarantor of this cosmic order. His actions, even his personal life, had direct consequences for, well, existence as they knew it.
Wow, talk about pressure. So like a good harvest, that meant Ma'at was okay. But a drought or famine?
Look out. That meant the pharaoh wasn't doing his job, and the consequences, well, they could be dire.
It's kind of mind-blowing how central this idea of cosmic balance was to their entire worldview. So it's clear, being pharaoh wasn't just about fancy palaces and grand pronouncements. There was this whole other spiritual cosmic dimension to their power. But what about the day-to-day realities? What did it actually look like to walk in a pharaoh's sandals, so to speak? Let's get into that, shall we? So, if we could hop in a time machine and follow a pharaoh for a day, what would we actually see? What did their to-do list look like?
Oh, forget about lounging around those palaces. We're talking about a seriously demanding job description here.
Right, it wasn't all about pyramids and power poses.
Not even close. Remember, they weren't just political leaders. They were also like the spiritual heart of the kingdom, the bridge between the gods and humanity.
Right. The articles talked about them being the intermediary between gods and people. What did that actually look like in practice, though?
Well, picture this. You're in an ancient Egyptian temple. The air is thick with incense. There are these massive columns everywhere, hieroglyphics covering every surface. And there, in the middle of it all, is the pharaoh, leading these elaborate rituals and ceremonies, offering prayers, making sacrifices, doing whatever it took to keep the gods happy and the cosmos in balance.
And I bet those ceremonies weren't just little private things, right? Some of the articles mentioned festivals, public appearances.
Absolutely. It was about spectacle, for sure, but it wasn't just a show. These events were a way for the pharaoh to connect with the people, to demonstrate their piety, show that they were worthy of their position as the guarantor of Ma'at.
It's so easy to forget from where we sit how central religion was to their entire civilization.
It was everything. And the pharaoh, he wasn't just a ruler. He was like the embodiment of that religious devotion.
Which makes you think about those pharaohs who tried to mess with that whole system. Like, wasn't there one who tried to get rid of all the gods except for one?
You're talking about Akhenaten. He's a fascinating case. Tried to replace the entire pantheon with Aten, the sun disk. just wiped his hands of centuries of tradition.
Bold move. What made him think he could get away with that?
It's hard to say for sure, but it seems like he genuinely believed that Aten was the one true God. Went so far as to, like, move the capital, build new temples, but it didn't last.
And what happened?
Well, imagine the reaction. The priesthood, they weren't too happy. Their whole power structure was tied to those traditional gods.
Right. And for everyday people, too, their gods were like woven into every aspect of life.
Exactly. Big change like that, it was bound to cause some serious upheaval.
So even with all the power of a pharaoh, you couldn't just rewrite centuries of belief overnight?
Nope. Tradition dies hard.
Okay, so we've got the pharaoh as a spiritual leader, but what about the whole military commander thing? Was that just a ceremonial title, or were they expected to, actually lead troops into battle?
Oh, they weren't just sitting back giving orders from some palace balcony. They were expected to defend Egypt, protect its borders, maintain order.
So Marat wasn't just this internal thing, it applied to their foreign policy as well.
Precisely. It was about maintaining balance both within and outside the kingdom.
It's one thing to command an army, but to actually be on the front lines.
It was a different time. Take Thutmose III, for example. One of the articles talks about how he personally led his army to put down a rebellion in Syria.
Wow, so they weren't afraid to get their hands dirty?
Not at all. And keep in mind, for the ancient Egyptians, their civilization was the center of the world.
So expanding their influence was, in a way, about expanding Maat.
Exactly. They saw it as bringing order and stability to the rest of the world. It was their cosmic duty.
So we've talked about the pharaoh as a spiritual leader, a military commander, defender of cosmic balance on a global scale. But we can't forget about the, more practical side of ruling a kingdom. Like, how did they actually manage the economy?
Right, because someone has to keep things running.
Exactly. And one of these articles mentioned something really interesting. Ancient Egypt didn't have a standard currency like we do. No coins, no bills, nothing like that. It makes you wonder how they actually did business.
It's one of those things that really makes you think differently about what an economy even is. Instead of money, they used commodities, grain, linen, precious metals. Even stuff like beer and livestock was used as payment.
Really? Beer? That's amazing.
Oh, yeah, it was a big part of their culture, so it makes sense to be tied into the economy as well. But anyway, imagine a system where wealth is all about these physical goods, these essential resources.
And I'm guessing the pharaoh had a pretty big say in how all of that worked.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they control the land, the temples, the mines, basically everything. They were the economy, in a way.
So it wasn't just about amassing gold or anything like that.
No, it was about managing those essential resources, making sure everything flowed smoothly throughout the kingdom.
And I bet those massive building projects, the pyramids, the temples, those played a role as well.
Oh, for sure. We tend to think of those as just displays of power, but they were also huge economic drivers. Think about the materials, the labor, the organization involved. It's mind-boggling.
It's like their legacy wasn't just these physical structures, but also woven into the very fabric of their society.
Exactly. They were building more than just monuments. They were building a civilization.
That's incredible. But even with all that power, all that responsibility, I'm sure things didn't always go perfectly. What happened when a pharaoh, didn't live up to the job description? What were the consequences of messing with Marat?
Well, let's just say the ancient Egyptians weren't big on giving out second chances when it came to cosmic balance.
Yeah.
Remember, mana wasn't some abstract idea. It was the foundation of their existence.
Right. Mess with Ma'at, you mess with the universe.
Exactly. So if a pharaoh messed things up, it wasn't just bad leadership. It was a threat to their entire cosmic order.
And the consequences were?
Well, the sources mentioned droughts, famines, plagues. Basically, anything bad that happened, you could blame it on a pharaoh who wasn't holding up their end of the bargain with the cosmos.
Talk about pressure. Makes you understand why they were so obsessed with securing their legacy, not just in this life, but in the afterlife, too.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings us to those awe-inspiring pyramids, of course.
Which are about way more than just, being fancy tombs, right?
Way more. You got to remember, for the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't the end. It was just a transition to another realm, just as real, just as important as this one.
And the pharaoh, as this intermediary between the gods and the people, he had to make sure that transition went smoothly.
Exactly. And that's where the pyramids come in. They weren't just tombs, they were like these eternal vehicles designed to help the pharaoh's spirit, their Ka, navigate the afterlife.
And they spared no expense outfitting these pyramids, right?
Are you kidding? We're talking treasures, provisions, even boats.
Boats. Seriously.
Yeah, to sail the celestial waters, of course. They were planning for everything.
Wow. It's like they were trying to take it all with them.
In a way, they were. And don't forget, these weren't just solitary structures. They were part of this massive complex of temples, tombs, monuments. It was a whole interconnected city of the dead, designed to mirror the order and harmony of Ma'at in the afterlife.
So even in death, the pharaoh was still responsible for maintaining that cosmic balance.
Always. It was a lifetime job and then some.
It's amazing how their beliefs influenced every single aspect of their lives, from the smallest detail to these massive, enduring monuments. Really makes you appreciate that we're not just talking about powerful rulers here, we're talking about a completely different way of seeing the world. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of the pharaohs. We've explored their power, their beliefs, the incredible legacy they left behind. But like any good deep dive, we're left with even more to think about. Until next time, keep exploring.